Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live on the phone with me today, I have L'Oreal Thompson Payton in Chicago, Illinois. A masterful storyteller with a passion for empowering young women, L'Oreal is the Media Relations Manager for Girl Scouts of Greater Chicago and Northwest Indiana. Prior to joining Girl Scouts, L'Oreal was a professional journalist for 7 years, most recently as the digital content editor for Jet Magazine. L'Oreal, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it.
Well, it's so nice to meet you. I reached out to you after I found, or I read a piece that you wrote for HelloGiggles, and I really loved it, so I'm so excited to share your story. The piece that you wrote was called, "This is What Happened When I Finally Let Go of My 5-Year Plan." And I really liked it. So I'm curious to start off with, what did you think you'd be doing now when you first had a 5-year plan?
Yeah, so right now, at this stage in my life, 29 going on 30, about mid-level career, I truly and sincerely thought that I would be this high-profile magazine editor, living in New York City, calling the shots, going to fashion shoots, writing my editor's letter every month. And that just didn't happen. Not for lack of trying. I just kind of had a change of heart while I was at Jet Magazine, actually, and having been a journalist my entire professional life, I just started to feel burnt out, honestly, by all of the breaking news. Social media never sleeps, the 24-hour news cycle, and all became a bit too much. And I got into journalism because I wanted to, at the time when I was a teenager, start a teen magazine to help young women of color feel empowered. And because growing up when I did, it was all Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. I didn't see myself reflected in those pages, and so I wanted to do something about it. So the whole reason I even started journalism was to help young girls. And the further I got into my career, the further I feel like I was removed from that original purpose. And so I started thinking to myself, well, how can I still use my skills as a writer and an editor, but use it to do that original mission of empowering girls? And that's when I started to brainstorm about nonprofits, and the largest nonprofit for girls is Girl Scouts. And so I did some social media stalking with the local council, did some coffee dates, and eventually, long story short, worked my way into the organization, and I'm here now as the media relations manager.
Oh, that's so great. So how long have you been there now?
About a year and a half. Will be 2 years in July. So at some points I'm like, oh, this is going by really fast. At other points it's like, it's only been a year and a half. So it depends on the day.
Right. I completely understand. Well, so was it a quick decision, or how long did it kind of take to go through that process that you described?
Yeah, that initial aha moment was probably July 2014. So specifically, it was the day that the shooting in Ferguson happened, and it was a Saturday. And I was dressed up, ready to go out to dinner. My fiance at the time, now husband, and we were going on a double date with his friend and his girlfriend, and it was just supposed to be like, oh, fun Saturday night, and I'm in my hair, makeup, dress, and my heels. And then the news broke, and it's like, at the time, just me and my editor, so I was like, okay, let me pull out this laptop and get to work. But then it just kept happening. And so it really started to take a toll. I was becoming desensitized to the news because it was essentially the same story, just a different city and different names. And I just didn't like that numbness that I was feeling. And so that summer is when I started to really think about, okay, maybe I should look into nonprofits. And so I started with the research. And a fun part about the story that I don't always share is that there was a blip, or not a blip, a brief stint rather, with the local public school system. So I was a communications strategist for Chicago Public School for about 6 months while I was still trying to get into nonprofit. I knew that I needed that communications experience, and so I was like, I'll just do this until something else comes along. And that May or June is when the hiring manager that I had previously interviewed with at Girl Scouts, so there was another position that I was interested in but didn't get it. It came down to me and one other person. They chose the other person but kept in touch, and she mentioned they would be hiring a media relations manager sometimes in the future. And when that time came, about May or June of 2015, is when I was like, yes, please, sign me up. And even then, it was kind of this back and forth because, I mean, anyone who works in a nonprofit knows that it's not, you're not in it for the money. And so my mom, especially when she hears nonprofit, thinks no profit. And so that honestly is what kind of led me to decline the position at first, because I was so wrapped up in other people's ideas of success and what that looks like that I didn't listen to my gut, like trust my gut. And it just weighed on me so heavily that I think I made a mistake. And I called the hiring manager back and I told her, I know people don't get second chances in life, but I promise you, if you hire me, I will not disappoint you. And that's the rest, I say, is history.
Oh, that's awesome. So something you mentioned I think that's really important I want to touch on is you mentioned that first time that you interviewed with the Girl Scouts, you actually did not get the job. You were number 2, and you stayed in touch with them. So I talk with job seekers a lot, and they are really unwilling sometimes to do this because they feel offended. They take the very first strike extremely personally. How were you able to kind of separate yourself and say, it's maybe not me, maybe I should stay in touch with them? Like, how are you able to keep that in your head?
I am very determined. So even my job that I got at Jet, I must have interviewed for 2 other positions before they finally let me in the door. So I'm just not someone who takes no for an answer. Like, if my mind is set on something, I'm going to find a way to make it happen. And I don't believe in burning bridges because things change. The person they happened to hire for the role at Girl Scouts didn't work out, and that was to my advantage. If I had been stubborn or hard-headed or just, unwilling to keep that door open, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you now. So I think it's crucial, especially for a position you really want or organization that you really want to work for. You may not hear a yes the first time, and that's okay. The point is to be resilient, to keep that relationship open. I would email when I saw an interesting article that I thought the hiring manager might be interested in. Oh, I saw Girl Scouts in the news. How are you guys doing? Just those little check-ins every now and then, an email, social media, meeting up for coffee every once in a while to see how it's going, kept me top of mind so that when that position did become available, I was the first person they called.
That's awesome. I love that. It's such a good idea, like the sending an email with an article and just kind of, I'm assuming you didn't always hear back when you sent that email. Is that true, or did they always respond to you?
More often than not, because what you'll find with Girl Scouts is that everyone's really passionate about their job. So when you find those news segments and they're like, hey, I saw this, they're like, oh, that's great. So more often than not, I did get a response. But when I was at Jet, for example, and did kind of the same thing, especially because at the time I was in Baltimore and looking to move to Chicago, of course it wasn't always as easy to do the meet in person or catch up over coffee kind of thing. So keeping the lines of communication open on via email and social media. I mean, do not overlook social media. That's how I got this job. That's how I got my job with Jet. Those connections on Twitter can take you a very long way.
So what do you mean when you say that you use social media to get your job? How did you use it?
Yeah, they joke here that I'm kind of a social media stalker, and what I mean by that is that I will look up people online. I will Google you within an inch of your life and find out your likes, your dislikes. On Twitter, I will follow you, respond to your tweets, retweet you to really establish that rapport. And I feel like it's sometimes easier to do that on social media because people are talking about what they like or what they don't like. It makes the conversation a little bit easier. And the important step that I think some people overlook is they stay in the Twitter sphere, but it's very important. The kind of make or break is taking those relationships offline. So once we establish a connection on Twitter, we're following each other, we're in the same city, let me direct message you, hey, how do you feel about meeting for coffee one day or whatever, and then taking the relationship offline, and that's when you really get those personal connections.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to send someone a direct message via Twitter and ask them to go and have a coffee, say you sent it to 10 people, how many of the 10 do you think would say yes? Like, what's a success rate that we should expect with that kind of technique?
Maybe 50-50. It depends. The type of people you're reaching out for, their level of where they are in the company. Obviously, the higher up you get, the less time people have, the busier they are, they may not be able to meet. But if you're going kind of peer-to-peer or people maybe just do one level above you, I would say, yeah, probably about half or half, and if not more than that. And especially if you connect that to like a local networking group in your city where you can meet people. That's another way of doing that. But it just kind of depends. Your industry, of course, will have a role in that, in the person, because, I mean, it depends. You can reach out to some companies and the CEO's like, yeah, sure, we'd love to meet with you. And other ones are just, too busy, and it's totally understandable. The important thing, as you mentioned before, is not to take it personally.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, because I'll have people come in and they're focused, talk to me about their job search, and they're focused on the 50% of the times that someone did not respond, as opposed to the 50% when they did respond. And it's much more productive to focus on the ones that did respond than, you got to just realize the ones who don't respond, they're either busy or maybe that's just not their thing. Maybe they don't prefer to meet people from Twitter. So
right.
It probably isn't you. It's just maybe like the way that they, function. Well, you mentioned, it had like outside perception of working at a nonprofit and that it is like no profit or something. How else? Well, let me not even say that. I would say my perspective is that nonprofits can pay decent, but it depends on the nonprofit. Like you really have to look into that. But aside from possibly pay differences, how do you think working at a nonprofit is different than working at a for-profit now that you've kind of experienced it?
My goodness, the work-life balance alone is reason enough to, but it was, when I came here and they mentioned, you have 4 weeks of vacation, you have the week off between Christmas and New Year's. The managers are all very flexible and understanding, especially if you're a working mom or working parent, and you have to, things come up, like life happens, and they're very understandable of that, and very, I remember when I first started about 5:30 or so, our office is closed at 5, and I was just wrapping up some things. Like, I worked in the newsroom, so I'm used to long hours and just kind of, whatever it takes to get it done. Mm-hmm. And my manager came up, like, what are you still doing here? I'm like, I was just going to wrap this up. She's like, I'll be there tomorrow. I'm like, okay, cool. So the work-life balance part of it has definitely been one of the advantages, I feel like, in a nonprofit, and the fact that you have people who are so dedicated and so passionate about the mission. It really, truly makes a difference. It's just you do what you need to do to get the job done, and my coworkers are like family. I mean, I've never laughed so much at a job before. We really look out for one another, and it's just kind of that office, that work environment, the culture of the office that, in my experience, has been absolutely awesome.
That's so interesting. I would have to assume it's partly because your coworkers are also drawn to the mission, and they may have priorities that are maybe more similar to yours, and I could see that. That's really great and really nice. Yeah. Well,
I mean, we have our rough days. Like, Andy, it's still a business. At the end of the day, I think it's something that a lot of people forget. It's a nonprofit, but it's still a business. So,
right.
It's not all rainbows and butterflies all the time. Like, most days are really good, but you have your off days. But on the off days, you remember why you're doing it. In our case, it's for the girls. Everything we do is for the girls. And when you bring it back to that, it makes everything else okay. You can deal with, the not-so-good things because you realize the bigger picture here.
Absolutely. I'm located in Memphis, Tennessee, and we have St. Jude Children's Research Hospital here. Mm-hmm. And I once had an executive from there tell me that on the bad days, because she described something really similar, she said on the bad days she will walk through the hospital and it will remind her once she sees the children of why she's there. And then she'll go back to work and she can get through the bad days or the tougher days, just keeping that mission in mind and why she came there in the first place. So that's really interesting. Yeah. Well, I know personally I've moved from for-profit to nonprofit myself, and it can be a really hard shift because sometimes you interview with people who assume that you couldn't possibly work at a nonprofit if you've never done it before. And I'm curious, how did you get a nonprofit to take you seriously, given sort of this extensive work at for-profits that you had before?
Yeah, I relied heavily on transferable skills. So it's funny because I had this conversation with a young woman yesterday who was thinking about going back to school. And I thought about the same thing for like, okay, well, I've never worked at a nonprofit before. I'm going to have to go back to school and get my master's. And the more I looked into it and the positions that I was looking at, so again, with writing and editing being sort of my superpowers, I knew that a communications role would be the best fit for me. And looking at the job descriptions, I realized I already know how to do this, and I'm doing it, or I have done it before. And so it's really reliant on those transferable skills to paint the picture and show them that, hey, I am capable of doing this. And what worked for me, especially in Girl Scouts, is that I was very smart in my stalking and my game plan of how to get in here. And I volunteered with them for a few months before I started working there. So then I have this insight as a volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing, I think, with nonprofits a lot of times, you can teach people how to use a type of software.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a big deal. But if they don't have that passion, that motivation for the mission, then it's all for naught, kind of, because at the end of the day, you have to really want this in order to do it. And I feel like that could be the same with any industry, but in nonprofits especially, because what we do is so tied to the mission that I can teach you how to use this software and send out press releases. What I can't teach you are the soft skills, the people skills, and the love for the girls.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm curious, were you ever a Girl Scout yourself?
I wasn't, and it's so funny because most of the people in our marketing team, except for our VP, we weren't Girl Scouts growing up.
No. Wow.
Yeah, that's people are like, oh, really? And I feel like a fraud sometimes going out, but all of us as employees are members, so I'm always like, well, it's better late than never. Like, I am one now. But I told my husband already, we don't have kids, but if we have a daughter, I'm signing her up for Girl Scouts because the leadership skill. I mean, I wish I had done it when I was younger because these girls are building Lego robots. They're working on, different community projects and helping animal shelters. There's a homeless shelter. Like, they're just doing so many amazing things that I'm kind of like, why didn't my parents sign me up for this? When I was younger, I feel like I missed out, but I'm making up for lost time, so it's all good.
Oh, that's so interesting. I was a Girl Scout from, I think, age 5 until middle school or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to so many Girl Scout camps and sold so many Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah, I'm packing up Girl Scout cookies today to send out to our media contacts. So it's like, oh yeah, it's dangerous too to have them so close. You're like, I'm just going to have one, a whole box later.
No, it's
okay.
not possible. Well, so I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about that. I'd noticed something. Yeah. So my own background is a little bit digital marketing, so I may be more tuned into this than normal. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden this year, I started seeing parents on Facebook posting a video of their daughter saying, buy Girl Scout cookies for me. And there's a link. And the girl has her own page where she can actually sell the cookies online now instead of going door to door. Is that a new thing or has that been going on for a while?
It is relatively new. So within the last few years, our national organization has rolled out the digital cookie program wherein people can buy cookies online. And it depends according to council. So we have more than 100 councils in the country. And our particular council isn't participating, but there are plenty that do. And we definitely encourage using safety in those guidelines at top of mind, of course. But for the girls, they can use social media. You see the ones out there with the YouTube video. They are out there with their squares like, oh, I don't have cash. They're like, that's okay. I can
they have a square?
They are savvy. They are so savvy that they really eliminate all excuses. Oh, you're on a diet or you're counting calories and you can't have cookies? Well, our Gift of Caring program sends cookies to men and women in the military. So they just eliminated all of those excuses, and they are so savvy now and using online presence and social media and YouTube to really get out there and sell it. It's awesome. They're little cookie bosses. I mean, it's impressive.
Well, I don't remember, but from when I was a kid, when are the cookies sold? It's not all year, right? There's a certain time.
Yeah, a certain season. And so right now we are actually in the midst of cookie season. Our particular council started January 1st with girls taking the orders from their family and friends, and then our booth sales, when you'll see them out on the street, starts February, mid-February, and it lasts until the end of March. And I think most councils follow the same kind of January through March timeline, but again, it depends according to council.
Depends.
But if you go online or you download the official Girl Scout Cookie Finder app, you can find the booth located nearest you.
Oh, no way.
Your heart desires.
So what if, so I was actually thinking this. I don't personally know any Girl Scouts right now, and I want to get some cookies. And can I go online and get cookies even though I don't know a specific child? What should I do if I don't know someone?
The easiest, once they have the booth sales when they're out and about, and that's where the app kind of comes in handy, because a lot of people, especially with us being in downtown Chicago, they don't necessarily see the girls out at the Walmart and the
Right.
Jewels. And so the app is the best way to find your local Girl Scout and see where they are. And that way you can figure out where the closest one is to you and get them that way. And or contact your local council. I mean, sometimes they have them available in the local gathering places or offices, you can call them, and you can find them there. But the app is probably the best way to find out the ones who are closest to you.
Where they are, okay. That's amazing and so impressive. I'm really glad to know more about that. Well, so I mentioned at the beginning of the program that I first learned about you when I read one of your pieces on HelloGiggles, which is a website that's kind of geared towards women. But you've also written for a number of other publications, including EBONY, Jet, and Brit Co. And I mean, there's a big list. I'm curious, I believe that these are all freelance projects for the most part. And I'm wondering, does that kind of allow you to still get the taste of journalism while you're kind of balancing sort of both sides? I mean, what do you... Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's funny because, again, having the same conversation with someone yesterday where I feel like now I kind of have the best of both worlds. So my 9 to 5 in Girl Scouts gives me that passionate part. Like, this is what I want to do, and helping girls and giving back, and the structure and the paycheck. When now I have the freedom to write what I want to write when I do freelancing, because when you're, in the newsroom, you aren't, for the most part, don't have as much say. You kind of write what's happening, the breaking news, and having to deal with that. And the freelance part of it allows me to write about topics that are important to me, which usually center around empowering women and different life lessons. So, for example, the learning to let go of my 5-year plan is kind of, if I'm going through this or I have this experience, chances are there's someone else who can relate as well. And so it's important for me to share those stories, especially for women, because I feel like we just live in this day and age where social media will have you believing everyone's living their best life ever. And you can fall into a trap of comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. And what I want to do on my blog and in my freelance writing is kind of break down those barriers and tell people, hey, this is what it's really like, or what I'm going through. Because so many people, even I wrote my most recent piece for HelloGiggles about deciding to go to therapy, and there are so many people like, wow, I never would have thought, or you have it all together. And it's like, yeah, well, that's what you would think on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. But like at the end of the day, we're all just people, and we're all just trying to figure it out. So if I have an opportunity to share those stories, then it's just my kind of responsibility, I feel like, as a writer and a blogger to get that out there.
That's really interesting. I noticed that. I went through a number of your stories, and I noticed, I was like, wow, she's able to really be so transparent about what's going on in her life. And that's something that's really rare in general. But I didn't think about the fact that now that you're doing it sort of as a side project, you have more control over the topics that you're writing about versus being assigned what you're going to be writing.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it must be even more fulfilling than it was before, potentially.
It is. It really is. In the spirit of transparency, there are times when I'm like, oh, man, should I go back to journalism? Especially, I look at Teen Vogue, and I just signed up for a subscription. I'm 29. I'm not a teenager, but what they are doing right now is so phenomenal in the diversity of their stories and their staff that sometimes there is a party who's like, oh, well, do I want to go back to journalism? And then I look at Snapchat, and their editor-in-chief is leaving the office at like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, maybe not. Maybe I'll just stick to this.
Right. It is really hard, that whole work-life balance thing. I think at some point maybe your priorities begin to shift. I think it's really similar when you work in the internet world or sort of the digital marketing world, that a website has to be up 24/7. So especially if it's like e-commerce, and if it ever goes down, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're expected to get on it, and
exactly.
It's a tough thing to do if you're trying to have a life or have a family or have a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something even from like different priorities at different times. Once I got married, like living the bachelorette life, I would stay up to 2 o'clock in the morning working on stories, and that's no big deal. And then when I got married, my husband was like, are you coming to bed? And I'm like, oh, yeah, right. There's this other person that I have to consider now. So then things tend to shift a little bit and just kind of rolling with the punches and, just adjusting to life as it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I'm sure there are people listening that are thinking, wow, having sort of like a side hustle or like a side thing would be great. It would really help me to kind of fulfill some interest that I have. If we're listening today and we're interested to sort of pursue that, do you have any tips for us to kind of get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I use a lot is making the most of the little moments. So, I commute every day on the bus. That's about half hour. I write drafts of blog posts in my phone or stories that I'm working on. Lunchtime is when I do interviews like this or interviews that I'm using for stories that I'm working on. And that's an hour where I have this time for myself and get things together. And just being organized, keeping schedules. The advice with the side hustle I was telling someone recently is to think about the skills that you already have that you can monetize. And sometimes we try to reinvent the wheel or end up doing something we don't like why pick up a extra shift at a retail store if you can make money doing graphic design or something that's like what you already do and just do it on the side. And oftentimes you can make more money working for yourself that way as a side hustle than you do doing your day job. So you get whatever X amount of money at work for your skills. But when you freelance or you side hustle, you set your own rate. The sky's the limit. So it's really about being smart about what you like, because that's the other thing, too. It's still work. So when you have a side hustle, you are almost always working. So pick something that you enjoy doing, so that way, even though it is work, it doesn't necessarily feel like work. You don't want it to be this extension of your day job and feeling bogged down, because that's the quickest way to burn out.
Oh, I totally agree. You don't want to hate your personal life as much as you may hate your work life if you're not if you're not feeling fulfilled. But I'm curious, not to go too far off topic, but you have a tremendous amount of sort of resilience and kind of knowing who you are and what's important to you. Do you remember kind of having this throughout your life, or do you think it's kind of developed over time? What has kind of moved you in this direction?
Yeah, I've definitely gotten more confident and more outspoken over time. And that's just, growing up was very shy, which no one believes me when I say that, but I was. And just learning from my mom, honestly. There were a lot of things she told me when I was younger about having to stick up for myself and demand, what I want for things I didn't really pay attention to. And now, having been in the workforce for a while, I'm learning that, yes, it is important for me to have a voice and to speak up. And I think last year was very pivotal in that. I've been talking about finding your voice and using it for the greater good ever since high school when I was editor-in-chief of my school newspaper. But last year, with a lot of the police shootings that were taking place and a lot of other current events, it's so easy sometimes as a blogger or someone with a brand to be like, oh, well, this doesn't fit into my brand, I'm not going to talk about it, and kind of play it safe. And I just got to a point where I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired and decided I have a platform and I'm going to use it. I'm a writer. All I have are my words, but I'm going to use them to make a difference, to empower other people, to give a voice to the voiceless. And that's kind of been my goal and mission, and everything that I do is tied to empowering women and girls of color especially, because if I can prevent or help one girl feel more confident and not feel like I felt when I read those teen magazines growing up, then it's all worth it.
Absolutely. I think you make so many good points. And I know for those of us who come from a strictly corporate background, you're almost conditioned in a way to kind of keep your personal opinions to yourself. And it can be so hard. I know that personally, it can be really hard to find your voice. So it's really impressive. I really admire that you're able to kind of do that. So now my very last question, we've kind of gone through where you started and kind of what you're doing now. I'm curious, how do you feel about your 5-year plan from here going forward? What does it look like?
I don't have one.
Awesome.
And it's so weird for me because I am very type A, overly ambitious. I think my therapist actually called me a neurotic perfectionist. And so this kind of ambiguous gray space where I don't really know what it is that I want to do next is weird for me. It's kind of scary, and I've always been a planner. I've always had a plan, but what I've learned is that life doesn't always go according to plan. If you had told me 5 years ago that I would be working for Girl Scouts in Chicago, I would have laughed in your face, because that was never a part of the plan. And what I've learned in that is to be open to life's experiences. So, no, I don't know where exactly I would like to be. If I stay in nonprofit, would definitely like to move up in that career. If I go back to journalism, become an editor, the door is wide open, and I don't want to limit myself or kind of block my blessings by putting a very strategic timeline or titles attached to it, just kind of letting life happen as it will. Just being ambitious, obviously, and setting goals, of course, but not being so tied to, I have to be this by this, is really kind of been a learning moment, especially for me. I've been obsessed with Forbes 30 under 30 for I don't know how long, and I turned 30 this year, and I didn't make it, so that chance is gone. But I'm trying to be like, you know what, it's not the end of the world. It's still going to go on. I'm still going to go and do great things, and so it's not about the timeline, but rather what you do during that time.
Absolutely. And I relate a lot to where you're coming from. So I appreciate you sharing that. Well, so this has been excellent. If our listeners would like to learn more about you or the Girl Scouts, where should we go?
Yeah, you can follow me online everywhere. I'm on social media, LT in the City, and my blog is ltinthecity.com. And Girl Scouts is for the national organization, girlscouts.org. If you want to find cookies, visit girlscoutcookies.org. And if you live in the Chicago, Northwest Indiana area, you can find us at girlscoutsgcnwi.org.
Awesome. Well, L'Oreal, thank you so much for joining me and for being so transparent about your journey. This has been awesome.
Absolutely. This has been a pleasure. So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. Thanks to those who sent me your questions. You can send me yours at angela@copelandcoaching.com. You can also send me questions via Twitter. I'm at Copeland Coach. And on Facebook, I'm Copeland Coaching. Don't forget to help me out. Subscribe on iTunes and leave me a review.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.